Good evening, everybody. I am thrilled to be doing this show. I know I say that every week, but we always just have such an incredible, phenomenal guest, and tonight's episode is no exception to that. Tonight we have Dr. Ryan Lowery, and he is absolutely incredible. Just papered with education, but so open and, just has an incredible sense of, why he is doing what he's doing. So definitely his personality resonates with me and, being the movement. And he's also a very special guest because him and his amazing colleagues over at ASPI, American Sports Performance Institute, they were really the ones to step up and do our research. So I see Ryan Lowery checking in. So this is always an issue for me because I'm low tech, but I'm gonna see, Ryan, if I can let you on screen like ASAP here. No, can you request me, Ryan? I'm going to turn on guest request, and then hopefully you will pop up and you and I can have a little chat. I know that the people who are watching tonight are very, very excited. Hi, Molly Frazier. I've seen your struggles this week. You and I need to have a talk. Get you going, girl. All right, just waiting a little bit for, the internet, gods. But I'll give you a little hello from BC, Canada. The Flames game is on. So I see all of you guys checking in. Hello, hearts, love, thank you so much. Just waiting on Ryan and this little technology. If you guys endured me and Julie Chilberg, and actually me and Olivia, then you'll understand that this is not the easiest thing to do. Thank you guys for commenting on my hair. To be totally honest with you, I have a raging black eye, but I have done some cover up and a little wave. Don't get excited, you probably won't see it again. All right, let me check in and see. Hello, Amy from Kansas City. Hello, Missy from Minnesota. Okay, Ryan, just make sure you do a request to join. I've got my guest request turned on, and as soon as I see that, I will let you in. Julie, sister, I feel you. But I do want to talk a little bit about what tonight's episode is about. And it's all about the ketogenic diet. And those of you who followed me for a long time know that I have pretty much done, it says must request you. I can't request you, Ryan. Let me see. Hold on, sorry. Hang on, guys. It'll be worth it, I promise. I don't know how to do this. I'm seeing, I don't know if we have to be friends. I turned on the guest request. Okay, so Leanne Went said she wants to be in her video, and I didn't request her. So I know you can do this, Ryan. Come on, you're younger than me, and you're not an alien. Those of you who are asking about my eye, it is a hazard of being a surfer. Yay, there's Ryan right there. Hey. Okay, gonna bring him on here. It says adding. Hello, Indianapolis. Hello, Cary, Illinois. Hello, PJ, Anna. Hey,
Hey, sorry about that. That was crazy.
The little facial you have going on there.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
How
don't
are
get
you?
mad at me. I'm gonna run and grab my notes. I thought they were next to me and they're not. So everybody hang tight and we'll be right
Perfect.
back.
Sounds good. Hey, everyone. Excited to jump on tonight. Going to be really, really amazing.
It was already educational, just the quick little conversation that we had earlier, and I was like, you know what, let's just save it for the show, because I'm very interested, particularly in some of the things that we chatted about as far as the disease and neurological dysfunctions and all of that. So I want to give you a proper introduction. So, you know, I know Ryan looks like a cute guy. Ryan is one of the most brilliant people that I know. He is formulating our fascia supplements. You can give him a little bit of your educational background, but I don't think that's what makes you so special. But go ahead and give us the letters and what you studied.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And my background, I got a BS in exercise and sports science from University of Tampa, then went on and got a master's degree in exercise and nutrition science, and just finished up a PhD in health and human performance, really with a focus on ketogenic diets and ketogenic therapies. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight.
So, you know, I always wonder, like, you know, I never even heard of it until you guys. Are you like me with fascia? Are you kind of like the cutting edge of this?
You know, there's several people who came before us, and this has been around for a long, long time. Our goal was, how do we help bridge the gap between the science that's out there that a lot of doctors talk about to practical application? And that's
Right.
one of the things we've been trying to do.
It's not easy, you know, because you're talking about these really complex, like you and I are the same in that respect. We're talking about these really scientific things, but we're trying to break it down for the normal person, which is, what do I do first thing in the morning? Yeah. It's not
Right,
easy.
right.
I want to talk a little bit. I had made a few notes. I do want to get into your backstory, but I first want to tell my audience how we met. So, you know, when you have a product, you go to market and you do like initial research, right? So we had tried it in our clinics. We did a small study in Tampa, which I think you knew about, which was more of kind of like for QVC type, you know, deal. And then, you know, we started selling so many of these things and getting so much feedback. And I think I get a lot of crap about, oh, you did your own research, you know, and I'm like, no, if you step up to do blinded research, which we chose ASPI, they're the best in the country, you have to be ready to be wrong, right?
Yep. And that's huge. And like, to your point, a lot of people aren't willing to take that risk because you don't know. When you're about to do research, you don't know how the results are going to turn out. And you only wait until the end of the study, and it's weeks and weeks and weeks of waiting, and you don't really know, and it's all blinded. No one knows what's going on, and the results are what they are.
I remember, you know, calling you guys like, please give me some good news. Please tell me it didn't affect our hormones. Please tell me there's, you know, so I have to tell you, doing research, particularly with these guys who are so scientific, and we can talk a little bit. I do want to promote ASPI. I mean, it's been life-changing for me, but, you know, to know that you can kind of hang your hat on the research is a really big deal for an inventor. So can you just characterize for our viewers, because I'm sure they're like, wow, like where do you even start, what ASPI does, and maybe talk a little bit about what you guys did for the FasciaBlaster, because all of the people following are FasciaBlaster users.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called the Applied Science and Performance Institute. And ultimately our goal was, it's cool to do research in academia, but we wanted to be able to take that to the world. And so we created ASPI that really has the most cutting edge equipment, things that we can look at on a micro level to detect change. And ultimately, that's when we connected, and you're like, hey, I want to look at all of these different markers and see what happens. And we pieced together, literally, I think we used nearly every piece of equipment that we have in ASPI.
We did, except for the bod pod. Everything.
Exactly. Exactly. So we wanted to look at every feature and say, listen, let's really look at this and figure out what's going on as really this first real big scientific exploratory study. And it was just amazing. It was incredible to watch the progress and watch the kind of transformations kind of happen before your eyes. You never truly know until you look at the data and go, wow, this is something that's legitimate. The numbers don't lie.
That's right. I love that because people always say, analyze this, analyze that. What do you think of this way to do the squat and whatever? And I'm like, what does the data say? You know, at the end of the
Exactly.
day, you can hang your hat on data, you can piece the, you know, puzzle together. And this is what you guys have done for ketogenic. So first of all, I just want to say that I have read the Ketogenic Bible from cover to cover. Thank you very much. I found it extremely interesting. And I think it's almost like my book where it's like an opening, it's a beginning, it's a conversation starter, right? Like you don't feel like the Ketogenic Bible was, you know, alpha and omega. You feel like it's let's talk, right?
Right. And that was the goal. The goal was how do we take all of this complex information, things that have been going on, and break it down so someone can literally read this and make it practical. And we wanted to touch on everything from the history of like, hey, how did we get here? How did we demonize fats and say fats are terrible for you? To now like fats are back and avocados are great. And like, how do we're incorporating those in again. So talk all the way through that. And then how can someone actually apply this? And we've been seeing it in our group and everything that's going on, and people are just absolutely crushing it.
No, it's so great. I mean, every time I go on, somebody's talking about how they lost 50 pounds on ketogenic. So I think that you guys are kind of in the box like me, where people are like, oh, let me do, you know, ketogenics to lose weight. The same way the FasciaBlaster is like, let me get rid of my cellulite. But really, that's not the crux at all of your passion, right?
Right, and that's where it starts. And it's interesting because a lot of people come in for the weight loss, but really what they're looking for is fat loss. No one really just wants to lose
Yes.
weight. They want to lose fat. And so they come in for the fat loss and all these secondary effects of like feeling better. They're back, they're in control of their hunger again. Their appetite's back in their control. We live in a society where ultimately the food dictates our appetite and we're losing control of it. And so it's kind of like people are like, wow, I'm not as hungry anymore. That's amazing. Or, oh, I can walk past the chip aisle and not have pull all these
Not
different
even
bags
want
out
it.
and be like, I need to eat them.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we're looking at that, but also really looking at the neurological benefits, how ketones can be taken up and utilized by the brain for a bunch of different applications.
Oh my gosh, cannot wait to get into that. But I just want to give our viewers a chance to know you. So we did some videos on your backstory, but I think that everyone that sets out to change the world, you don't just wake up and want to do it. Like, first of all, no one would do that. It's hard to change the world. There's a lot of backlash that goes along with that. So talk a little bit about your why, and it's very similar to Jacob or Dr. Wilson's why. I mean, this is a passion.
Big time. And it really started out when I was a teenager. And my grandmother passed away at 60 years old. And I remember like reading her autopsy, and it said an overweight woman in severe respiratory distress. And it just ate at me. It frustrated me because I was like, that's not who my grandma is. Like, that's what's on a piece of a paper at the end of her life. And it just ate at me. And I was like, why? Like, I was mad. I was like, why didn't someone give her advice? Why didn't someone help her? Why couldn't she lose weight? Why couldn't she do all these things? And so ultimately that gave us two options. We could sit on the sideline, complain, say the health industry sucks, people are terrible, this is horrible, or we could actually go out and be the voice and be the change ourselves. And so that's what really set me down that path. And then my entire family, like my mom has Crohn's, my aunt has MS, and ultimately my goal is how do I allow them to live their best life? How do I allow them to come up with tips and tools so that way they can actually go out and have a good time out rather than worry about every single thing that they're eating and feeling like crap all the time. And that's really what set us out on our mission.
I love that. So I'm just curious personally, like, how did you even land at keto? Like, where did you first read about it, and how did that spark you? You know?
Yeah, it was probably early on in college, either from colleagues of mine. We were at an event and they were talking about this, how keto can be anti-inflammatory, and immediately that struck a bell with me because my mom had just been going through a really bad episode of Crohn's, and I was like, you know what? I know Crohn's is an inflammatory condition. I wonder if there could be some application here. Like she eats very little food. She's usually snacking on crackers because she has such an adverse response to eating foods because she knows the consequence of it. So I was like, I wonder if there's something that, if this can be applied to her and it can be anti-inflammatory, is this something that could help? And it just brought me down the rabbit hole, and I just became so enthralled with it. Yeah.
That's so cool. So in the book, I just want to revisit that you guys wrote something that I found amusing, is that, you know, we can't just test everything on humans, right?
Right.
And nobody really knew what would happen if somebody did a fast for, say, 40 days, right? So we didn't even know that we could run on ketones. I think prior to this movement, at least in the general public, people thought that, you know, if you didn't have some sort of glucose, that you would die.
Right.
When did that switch?
Yeah, relatively not too long ago, like the 1960s is when they first started doing that research on like the extended fasting, like you were talking about. And they're like, these people may die. Like if you're not giving them food, there's no they don't have carbohydrates. How are they going to survive? And then they started looking in the blood, and they're like, wait, there are these other things known as like ketone bodies that are floating around inside of the blood, and they're perfectly fine. And there's actually a history of a guy who was morbidly obese, and it was medically supervised, but he underwent a fast of like, I think it was like 380 days, right? And because he was like morbidly obese and felt complete, all he drank was like water and electrolytes for I don't recommend that for anyone, but it was
Careful,
completely,
Ryan.
yeah, I know, but it's interesting to see like someone could do that.
It's the data.
Right.
So what happened?
And he lost, I think he lost over 150 pounds. All of his cholesterol improved, all of his triglycerides improved, blood sugar improved, and he felt fine, like felt great, was working. Like it's not like he sat and sometimes people think, oh, you're fasting, you're just going to sit in your bed all day. Like, no, they're actually operating at a high level because their brain's running on a completely different fuel source.
Let's talk about that, because I think that is the biggest misconception. And I just want to have full transparency that I've done ketogenic diet, and there's a lot of the components that I've adapted and some that I haven't. But what the most compelling thing for me to understand was the sugar depletion. I don't care what diet you do, sugar ain't good, right? Let's just talk about
right.
that. For inflammation, I mean, who even knows what illness I actually have? But I can tell you, I can eat sugar and it's instant inflammation. So I want to talk about two things before I run off on a tangent. One is I want people to understand that you are either running on glucose or you are running on ketones. And then second, like what happens to the body when you switch, and is it safe to switch, and can you do it sometimes, that type of thing. So let's talk about the two different systems, because I hear people all the time, they're like, oh, I do ketogenics, I just, you know, eat a donut once a week. And it's like, well,
right.
Yeah. So let's break it down like super simple, talk about the two different fuel sources and how they work differently.
Yeah, so you basically have carbohydrates, and carbohydrates get broken down into glucose. And typically, most people are running off of carbohydrates or glucose for a majority of their lives. There's a completely alternative fuel source, which is known as ketones, which get derived from fat. When fat gets broken down, whether it's your own body fat or it's like fat from an avocado, when those get broken down, you produce ketones. And so you can run off of these different substrates. It doesn't have to be completely either or. Even on a ketogenic diet, you are still utilizing some glucose inside of your body that your body's naturally producing, but you're primarily running off of ketones. And it's a superior fuel source. It activates a lot of pathways in the brain. It can be rapidly taken up and utilized by the brain. And one of the things that I know we're going to get into is like, they're starting to call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, because as we get older and in conditions of Alzheimer's, what we see is that uptake of glucose to the brain is impaired. Imagine like a tunnel, and there's all these tunnels to take up glucose into our brain. And as we get older, some of those tunnels start to close. The interesting part about it is the ketone tunnels are still there. They're not impaired at all. So we need to be feeding the brain the right fuel source that it can take up and utilize. And that's where like these ketogenic diets and ketogenic therapies come into play.
Wow, like I look at it the same way I do fascia. Like how did we miss this? Like, do you think this is what the cavemen were doing and then we went awry?
Yeah, it's interesting. Not only that, like I think we were definitely doing that back in the hunter-gatherer days. Like think about it, they were hunting, they were eating and killing what they ate. And they were going long periods of time fasting. It was like, hey, feast and famine, right? And so they were certainly in ketosis at some points because they would go 2, 3, 4 days without eating and then have their meal. So, and on top of that, like if you look at the life cycle, babies are really born in nutritional ketosis, especially if they're breastfed. Breast milk contains a high amount of MCTs or medium chain triglycerides, and you like literally can measure the blood of like newborn babies, and they're in ketosis because they're primarily drinking breast milk, which is very, very high in MCTs, which gets converted to ketone.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
I love to look at it like that. I did an interview earlier today and I was talking about what we see on the caves, and people were definitely rubbing each other. I wish we could see a little bit more of the fuel source. I know we see the meat.
Right.
I I want to just pause for 1 second because I have a lot of questions.
Hmm.
So one of the typical ones, and I'm sure you've gotten this, one of our longtime followers, affiliate alum, says, what's the difference between keto and Atkins?
Great question. So Atkins, in the introduction phase of the Atkins, I think they have different phases. The introduction phase of the Atkins is very similar to keto. But then what happens is Atkins goes, hey, let's start bringing down fat. Let's bring up more carbohydrates. And then, so that's kind of where Atkins differs, really. It's more of a
Mhm.
low carb approach versus like an actual ketogenic approach.
Mhm.
And just be cautious. One of the things that I think destroyed the Atkins movement is all of those products that came out, like
Yeah.
the Atkins, and so they're filled with like maltitol and sorbitol, which
Mhm.
are sugar alcohols, but they not only destroy your stomach, they actually increase your glucose and increase your insulin.
Right.
So you just need to be careful.
Disguised in the money part of it. I totally agree.
Right, right.
And then we have some people asking about traumatic brain injury. We also have people, so we've had a couple of things that I want to address because I really feel like people are just totally lacking in education. Like one lady was saying, does ketogenics help with loose skin from the FasciaBlaster? So first of all, any loose skin is either caused by dramatic weight loss or a lack of muscle tone to fill up the body. So I would have to answer that yes, ketogenics and fascia blasting can help with loose skin, but we have to be realistic about that, right?
Right.
I think that the general public kind of poses the ketogenic as the protein diet, but it's really more of a lean body mass. It's not like you're just sitting down and eating a ginormous steak with bacon. And I do think that's a misconception. I see it on the internet and I'm like, what? I've eaten with Ryan and he's having salmon and spinach, okay? Not,
Right.
a huge steak with bacon and cheese and the things. So can you just help people understand, let's talk just a second about like loose skin, muscle tone, fascia and ketogenics and how all of that could work together. Because it could.
For
It
sure, for
absolutely could.
sure, and I think there's a ton of synergy amongst using like the Fascia Blaster and utilizing a well-formulated ketogenic diet, because to your point, muscle tone is probably the most important piece of that. And how do you achieve that? And I think there's aspects of fascia blasting, there's aspects of ketogenic diet that when they come together, they're very synergistic in muscle tone. And we know we've actually seen that in our research with Fascia Blaster, but also with like a ketogenic diet, ketones themselves are like muscle sparing. It's very, very important, and they can help build muscle. That's been shown not only in
Yeah.
animal models but human models. So that's the ultimate goal: is how do you, like you said, we need to be realistic about it. But how do we take and optimize that muscle tone to the best of its ability? You need to look for things that work synergistically together.
100%. I totally agree. And that's where I really want to go next because you guys do so much research on exercise and everything else. So I just want to hear like what is the latest science in the whole pro sports world? Are like more and more athletes doing ketogenic? And I'm just curious for my own personal, how hard is that to get them to make that switch?
Yeah, it is interesting. A lot of people are making that switch, and you're starting to see it a little bit more on social media, people like coming out about it. And it's interesting to see, and it's exciting to see because it means that it's getting to people who have a ton of influence. But it's definitely difficult for most athletes to make that switch unless they're guided by like a nutritionist or dietitian because they're used to eating like their genetic freaks, like they're at the
Yeah.
top of the top, so they could eat McDonald's, Burger King, and go perform, and they're like completely fine. But you are starting to see more athletes looking for the longevity of their careers. They truly want to optimize their performance. And where we're really seeing it is like in the MMA world. I have a great friend, Josh Perry, who's in the BMX world. We're starting to see these people who are being careful about their brain and really want to protect it, starting to take notice and go, wow, nutrition does have an impact, and I need to make sure I'm taking that into account.
What a crazy concept. What we fuel
Right.
our body with matters. So, okay, let's pretend that we have ketogenic newborns. Where do they start?
Yeah, honestly, the best way to start, I mean, first off, I think you need to provide yourself information. That's why I love doing this. That's why I love our group. Like, you need to start with a foundation of some type of information. Just don't get overwhelmed with it. It's like to the basics. The basics are limiting carbohydrate intake, getting adequate amounts of protein, and then filling in the rest with fats to satiety. And so you can there's multiple different websites, multiple different resources like the book, but always the easiest thing to do is just start taking incremental steps of cutting out sugar. Like if you're someone who drinks 4 cans of soda a day, knock it down to 2. Like don't go overnight. Just don't go, I'm going to go and I'm eating 200 grams of sugar and now I'm going to go to 0. Like you want to make it sustainable. Take these incremental steps and make your way and say, I want to make this a lifestyle. I don't want to make it something that's temporary.
It's so funny because I'm reading the comments as we go and people are like, can I make this a lifestyle? And I feel like it's almost an easier lifestyle because you can at least have chicken wings and some things that, at least feel like a little bit of a cheat. So I know when I first did it, I was already, on a healthy diet. So going no sugar wasn't that big of a deal. But I think for a lot of people it is. And I think what we need to understand is that sugar can hide in things. So it's not just cutting like actual putting sugar or just sodas. Let's talk about all the things that sugars are hidden in or things that are called something else, but they really metabolize as sugar.
Yeah, great point. So like a lot of grains obviously have sugar in them. Some fruits, like some fruits that are really high in sugars, and I'm not saying that fruits are bad. I'm just saying some fruits are very, very high in sugar. The biggest culprit of all are sauces and condiments. I think a lot of people don't realize the serving sizes, things like peanut butter. Like I'll be the first one to admit I freaking love peanut butter, but if you've ever actually like weighed out a serving of peanut butter or you look at like a serving size of ketchup, it's really, really small. Yeah, and so we're used to having like 4 or 5 servings, and that adds up. So you just need to be very, very cautious and very conscious of that.
So if somebody says, all right, I've had it, I eat Whataburger, McDonald's, whatever. So if they start to do it, I want to talk a little bit about the ketogenic flu because I put everybody in my house on the ketogenic when we did it. In fact, everybody but me stayed with it, and I kind of do a blend. I still am sugar free, unless rum counts. But there was kind of the ketogenic flu, and we had our test strips and all of that. But I think that there's going to be, we have a lot of followers. There's going to be people that no matter what you say, they're going to cut the sugars. And when they do that, they're going to be cutting, everything from sodas to sweet tea to, bread to pasta, like I don't think people realize that sugar, but once you deplete yourself of that, there are some effects.
Certainly, and it's really important to know going into this, there will be an adaptation period. And the thing I'd always tell people is you've been primarily running on glucose and sugar for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. It's going to take more than 2 days for your body to completely change its fuel source and start running primarily on fat and ketones. There are ways to overcome that. Electrolytes are very, very important. And the main reason, in as simple as possible, is when you lower your insulin, and you lower insulin by lowering your glucose, by not consuming sugar. When you're lowering your insulin, you tend to excrete out more electrolytes. You're peeing out more sodium, more magnesium, more potassium. So you need to replenish those in your diet. You need to add extra sodium. You need to add extra potassium. That's why things like avocados, it doesn't even matter if you're on a ketogenic diet or you're not.
Right.
Like, they're a great staple. But they are very, very rich in potassium. So having extra electrolytes are one of the ways to really overcome a lot of that keto flu.
Are you a fan of the different various powders? I feel like you guys did research on this and could actually speak to it from a data analytic standpoint.
Like the exogenous ketone powder? Yeah, and those can be a great tool to help overcome them. And so we actually saw that some people it can help them through that adaptation period, because think about it, as your glucose is starting to come down, ketones aren't elevated enough yet. So you're kind of at this middle ground. That's where the keto flu sits. It's like you're sitting on the fence. You're not all the way in, you're not all the way out. If you can bump that up with like exogenous, you're getting the feeling of enhanced ketones, so you don't feel as bad throughout that adaptation period while you're continuously allowing your body to deplete glucose and switch over to the ketogenic diet.
Ryan, do you think that there's a myth that, you can do the ketones drink and you're in ketosis? To me, I don't know, my science brain goes, okay, that's like, I don't know, I can't think of a comparison at this point, but it seems to me that you have to do both. Like, you've got to deplete the sugar and then replenish, not just, oh, let me kick myself into ketosis as if it's some magic weight loss. And I fear that it's being marketed that way. So can you give us the science on that?
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing. Like, drinking ketones and then going to eat a Big Mac isn't going to do anyone any good. But there is data showing that ketones actually may help lower blood glucose levels. And what I've seen, a lot of people are incorporating them in, and it helps them through their fasting period, which is pretty neat. It's kind of like a modified fast where, hey, rather than them eating something at 11 o'clock, sometimes they might have something, because data shows that ketones may actually decrease appetite. So that now they might not be eating till like 1 or 2 in the afternoon. So it's ultimately allowing them to extend their fasting period, which can help.
I totally get it. It's so funny. Like, I'm looking at this whole, comment war on here, and it does seem like a lot of people are kind of, maybe we're talking a teeny bit over their head, just a little bit. There's some really educated people, and then there's some people that are like, what do I do if I'm allergic to avocados? So can we run through, we talk about, oh, this is a good food and that's a good food. And I think what happens in people's brains is they go, what do I do?
Right.
But with ketogenics, I can break a little bit of it down for you. Cut the sugar and cut any processed carbohydrate, period. Once you do that, you are well on your way. But the thing with ketogenics is that you're introducing more fat. So maybe give us the percentages. And then when we talk about getting more fat, I think that, we go, ooh, McDonald's.
Yeah.
When there's a lot of good sources of fat. I mean, I know sometimes I eat 8 almonds, Ryan, and, it seems kind of dumb, but like, that is fuel for the body. 8 almonds does a lot.
Exactly. No, and this is a really great point, because like the first time I heard of keto, I was like, oh, cool. So I'm just going to I used to eat like chicken and rice. So I'm just going to cut the rice, and now I'm just going to eat chicken. And that's not how it works. Like, you need to have fattier cuts. And that's why you brought up a great one, like salmon. Salmon's higher in fat just by nature. And so having things like that, you're cutting the sugar, and what are you left with? You're going to fill that in with healthy proteins and healthy fats. And that doesn't mean, and we talked about this before, like that
Yeah.
doesn't mean you need to stick an entire stick of butter inside of your coffee in the morning. It's like, no, you incorporate it in with your meals and get in these healthy sources of fat to make sure you're fueling your body.
I love that. I mean, I really feel like it's something super easy to do. You know, you met my son, Steven, and Steven is like one of those eaters that's like, he'll eat the same thing day in, day out. And if he can have his, you know, chicken wings with the skin on and, you know, mix it in with a little salmon and his vegetables and his green shakes, like that is the lifestyle.
Right, right.
Well, and it's interesting because so many people are chiming in, and it's interesting because I do think that people think that we're only interested in like weight loss and beauty, but we're really not. You and I were talking about it earlier. You know, my age demographic is like 30 to 50 is the meat of it. So we are experiencing for the first time like what the hell's going on with my body, and then we all have parents who are experiencing major issues. And I know that this is your passion, so I do want to jump in and talk about the neurological conditions. A lot of you guys have already asked about Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, traumatic brain injury. These crazy people are talking about my couch. It is not for sale. I am in another country. We're not importing. So let's talk about what is the latest. And I also, can we talk about cancer?
For sure. And there's emerging research in all of these areas. Our passion is right now is how do we look at the brain? And like I said before, how do we provide a fuel source to the brain that in situations with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and traumatic brain injury normally isn't there? Similar in all three conditions, like I said before, those tunnels for glucose being taken up to the brain are basically closed. How do we then provide a fuel source for them? And there's been tons of research, tons of data. There's been TED Talks on all of these things, looking at ketones being that replacement, ketones being that fuel source for their brain. And it seems extremely, extremely promising. More and more research is coming out, not only in animal models, but human models. And I think there is a tremendous amount of research supporting the thought process that it wouldn't hurt. Like, I know it's difficult to like, I can tell you, like working with my mom and dad, like it's difficult to be like, hey, you want to tell them this is what's best for you. But even getting them to start eating healthier sources of fat, like even some like MCT oil or things that are higher in MCTs, like macadamia nuts or almonds or avocado, if you can have avocado, whatever, like getting in these healthy sources of fat to feed their brain and get those ketones in. And that's promising. And a lot of our colleagues, to your other point, are doing a lot of research in cancer. And one of the things that's absolutely certain that we know of is that glucose and carbohydrates and sugar feed cancer cells. That's been shown over and over again. The more sugar goes up, the more you're feeding the cancer cells. It's one of the reasons why my uncle sat in a room and just got done with radiation and chemotherapy 2 years ago.
Oh, you
And
told me the story. I can't.
I remember, yeah, I remember sitting there and they're pushing around a cart with sandwiches and Coke and Pepsi and Sprite and and I'm like, these guys just literally went through the battle of their lives. They just fought through radiation and chemotherapy, and you're going to come around and go, let's slug down 40 grams of sugar? That's insanity.
Right. It's like
But
killing it and then feeding it, right?
and then feeding it, and it's like, but I hope it's not malicious by any means. I just don't think they know. I don't think they know that this is the research that's going on. And so how do you limit that sugar? How do you limit that glucose and potentially starve some of those cancer cells? And that's where a lot of research right now is being done with ketogenic therapies.
People, I have to tell you my fundamental belief, and I don't know if it's been proven or not yet, but I really believe that cancer, if you do hyperbaric oxygen chamber so that you force oxygen into the blood and then you deplete it and starve it of sugar, that it can't live. I mean, how am I way off?
No, you're very spot on. And I'll tell you this, there's very few human trials utilizing this therapy, but there's great friends of ours who run this thing. It's a keto pet sanctuary where they work with dogs. They literally rescue these dogs who have cancer from like shelters who are going to be euthanized, and they're using these protocols: hyperbaric oxygen therapy, a ketogenic diet, and exercise. And out of, I think right now they're up to like 60 dogs, and out of those 60 dogs, 59 have either completely reduced or completely gotten rid of their tumors at this point. And
Wow.
it's amazing. It's amazing to see that research being done. And I hope we can then bring it to human models and see how that can be applied.
You know, it's difficult, we both know, to go against the grain of traditional medicine.
Right.
But I always just say, you know, the numbers and the data don't lie. And if enough people, you know, be loud, then,
Yeah.
you know, we can make change. What are we finding? There's a lot of talk about the brain, and, you know, how, you know, earlier in the show, we had talked about how your brain can literally run on two different sources. So if we're running on ketones, what is the data showing specifically for Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so there's been studies looking at like giving MCTs, and MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, convert over to ketones very rapidly. And you see like cognitive scores, or like how well their brain is functioning, tends to go up. With the greater the degree of MCTs, the greater the degree of how much they're able to recall cognitively.
Wow.
And so
How far into Alzheimer's is that? Is that early onset, late onset, a mixed bag?
the better the results always are going to come with early. The earlier you can get it implemented, the less damage has already been done. But they're looking at both ends of the spectrum, and saying, is there any possibility, even at the late stages, to improve even a slight bit? But the earlier you can detect it and the earlier you can implement something, no matter what it is, ideally that's going to be the best.
What about traumatic brain injury? You know, this is something that's close to my heart. You know, treating the NFL all of those years, I read a really crazy statistic. I'm not going to hang my hat on it, but it's enough to start the conversation. The life expectancy for a veteran player that plays about 12 years is only about 12 years after they play. So
Scary.
it has to be TBI and lifestyle.
100%. And the scary part about it is, if you look at the brain of some of like the athletes that you worked with, you look at their brain after a game and compare it to someone who has Alzheimer's, a doctor likely wouldn't be able to tell the difference, because that's how much damage has been done. And if you look at like the glucose uptake, it's the same in both. It's not being taken up. And what happens with these athletes? They continue to get head trauma over and over again. Not only the big hits that we see on TV, but even the linemen who are like having these micro traumas to their head. And what do? They go over to the sideline, they slug down this sugar-filled beverage, and it's their brain isn't able to take it up and utilize it. So it's starvation in the face of plenty. You have plenty of substrate, but your brain is starving. And
Right.
we
That's a
start to see those
huge
complications.
differentiating factor, because starving like I'm hungry and my brain is starving are two totally different things.
Right. Like
That
it's
like gets
starving.
me excited, because I love the idea of feeding my brain. I think you guys remember when I
Yeah.
came in there and I did the full thing. I did the bod pod, the, you know, whatever thing made me look like an Oompa Loompa and all of that kind of stuff. But I told you I was having brain fog. And for me, that was a really, really scary thing. So I think that, you know, talking about how we can actually, you know, deplete our body in a way that we can reduce body fat to, you know, where it needs to be, but at not losing what we need for our brains.
Absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. That's the key, is how do you provide a substrate or a fuel source for your brain that effectively helps your body as well. That's the goal.
What about vegans?
It's possible. It's certainly more challenging to do it that way. Avocado. I feel like I'm coming back to avocados all the time.
I feel like that little video where the kid unwraps Avocado.
I love
Yay.
that. I love that video. But
That's you, Ryan.
that's me. That's literally me. But those are a staple. Nuts and seeds. Those are going to be a staple. It's certainly more challenging. I know plenty of friends and colleagues who are doing it and doing it well. In fact, I think for vegans or vegetarians, it's probably more ideal than not being ketogenic. And the reason I say that is because for vegans or vegetarians, if you're choosing that lifestyle, you just need to be cautious of muscle tissue. Typically, you're not getting in the same amount of amino acids or proteins that people who eat meat are, but we know that ketones help spare muscle tissue. So you need to be very, very cautious about sparing that muscle tissue, and a ketogenic approach might be the way to do that, and you can do it vegan or vegetarian.
I mean, I feel like if we just went the beans and lentil route and then everything else ketogenic, that would do it, right?
Right.
Yeah. I'm so about I've been watching every documentary out there, and I love the whole food, plant-based. But at the end of the day, we're all, aside from vegans versus meat eaters, I mean, we're all really saying the same thing.
That's right. At the end of the day, it's optimal health. And however you get there, and your path, everyone's journey is going to be different. There's overlaps amongst us all, and we need to understand there's important features that tie into, hey, how am I going to ultimately achieve optimal health and longevity?
What about things like there's a lot of buzz about detoxing, things like heavy metals, maybe past drug or alcohol use. What's the word in the science community about keto as far as like actually cellularly, restoring this tissue?
I think our bodies in a healthy condition, when our bodies are healthy, they're great detox machines. They're able to detox things on their own. The key is when we're overweight, full of inflammation, smoking, drinking alcohol, have all these things going on, you're going to store a lot more things, including some of those toxins, including some of those byproducts. If you get your body healthy and you get yourself on the right track and exercise and use some of these synergistic or great interventions together, your body will detox itself.
Wow, that's so cool. I love that. So for you personally, where are you headed with this research?
Right now, we're doing a lot of focus on the traumatic brain injury side. I think similar to what you said.
To reverse it?
We're trying to bring people, ultimately our goal is working with current and former NFL athletes to start. We're NFL and MMA athletes. And then how do we take that approach and bring it over into the Alzheimer's and Parkinson's world? Because that world is unfortunately rapidly expanding.
I'm so curious about Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and also MS. I feel like they sort of all fall in that same bucket. And I have a stepdad who has lived with Parkinson's for over 40 years. 40 years, that is a very long time. But several years ago, I just kind of kidnapped him and put him at least on a holistic lifestyle, not ketogenic, but it's very low sugar regardless. And it certainly has made a big difference for him. But I mean, don't all of those fall in the same family of neurotransmitters?
Yep, and they all have some type of neurodegenerative condition, and so there's extreme promise for each one of them, and ultimately it's in combination with like the standard of care. Even with cancer, when we're talking about that, the research that's being done is like, it's not saying, hey, completely do this and get rid of everything else. It's in combination with standard of care and hopefully optimizing that and hopefully taking what's being done and how do you accelerate that process? Not in a bad way, but how do you accelerate like maybe the decreasing the progression or seeing improvements? And that's where a lot of these things come together.
Totally. I totally get it. What about people who want to cycle in and like do keto for a little bit and then do something else for a little bit? How do you feel about that?
I think it's all about the timing. I think if you're people that are trying to come in and say, hey, I'm going to eat keto Monday through Friday and then have carb blowouts on the weekend, probably isn't the best approach. But if you're someone who's like, you know what, I want to go keto for the next month and a half, 2 months, and then I wanted to like cycle back out and go like low carb Mediterranean, and then you know what, let me go back in and do like keto again. That's a great approach. I tend to even take that more of a liberal approach. Like there are some months where I eat more like Mediterranean and then I'm not like full hardcore ketogenic. I might have a little bit more, but then I just kind of go back in.
But
It
we're
keeps
not
your body in
cycling
it.
between 8 beers and
Yeah,
pizza and then ketogenic.
exactly right. Exactly
Yeah,
right.
I'm so on board with that, which I like the idea of cycling in and out because
Mhm.
there's sometimes that I sort of accidentally do that. I'm more of a plant-based whole foods with fish diet, sugar-free. I don't even do, fruit because of the sugars. But I feel like if I did, 3 days of keto and, 4 days of what I'm doing, that I would get most of the same benefits. And I
Right.
think there's like almost this like war between keto and other programs. And part of my whole New Year, New You was to bring that together and be like, okay, do what's best for you. But let me tell you something. If I get diagnosed with Parkinson's, I'm going to get in that hyperbaric oxygen chamber. I'm going to go full on keto, no questions, no cheats. So I think it's like, what are you trying to do with your body, versus
Exactly.
what is better at whatever point in your life. I mean, it's got to be what you can stick to. It's got to be, your overall lifestyle. But, if you're experiencing certain diagnosis, like I'll wave the flag first for
Exactly
ketogenic.
right. Exactly
So
right.
going to the research, if you had like the wish list of things that seem promising to treat and just ran down the conditions, things that you think it can help with, and things that if we flash forward 15 years, we're going to go, of course, ketogenics was the cure. Give us some of those because I really want to give hope to people who, I'm making this up. I'm not a scientist on this, but like type 1, type 2 diabetes, you know, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Hashimoto's, mixed connective tissue disorder, fibromyalgia, all of those. So what does the research show? And then what is our hope for the future in terms of obviously combining modalities, but nutrition is a huge piece of that wheel. We already know that.
Absolutely. I think at the top of the list would certainly be the one you touched on, type 2 diabetes. I think it's unfortunately an incident right now where more and more people are getting diagnosed with it. And the simple solution is let's just pump them full of insulin. When the simple solution should be let's just remove the carbohydrates and glucose from their diet, and we won't have to pump them full of insulin.
Isn't that
That's
crazy? Even the thought that like when you get tested and you find ketones, that there's this instant societal, like that's bad.
right, right. It's big.
I grew up
It's
around
big.
that, thinking that with a step parent who had that.
And
So
that's
I
what's
love
taught in
that. I
school.
mean,
That's what's
I think we can call it like that's curable, right?
I think type 2 diabetes is certainly preventable. I think ultimately it comes from insulin resistance. And how do you develop insulin resistance? Your body keeps pumping out insulin and your body stops responding to it and goes, hey, I'm resistant to it. How do
Right.
you decrease that? You pull the carbs out. You pull the
Yep.
carbs out and you don't have that.
And you
So
shouldn't.
that's definitely the most promising. Then I think the next one would probably be a tie between neurological conditions and inflammatory conditions. And that's a whole
Woo!
host
That's like
of
all of them.
different things.
That's half
I
of
know,
the
I know,
ICD-9 code book.
I know it, I know it.
So
And
list those off because I'm not sure that people know what those are. So let's just go neuro. Give me your top 5 neuro that we feel we can help, and then top 5 inflammatory or autoimmune, which they're now throwing them all in the same category.
exactly. So Alzheimer's is tons of promise. Parkinson's, traumatic brain injury. Interestingly enough, there is some research going on with like autism, which is fascinating, and ALS. Um,
Wow.
Probably those at the top five, and we talk about all of these in the book as well
Yep.
because there's new research coming out on every one.
Wow.
And
Well, the book
and
is
then in
amazing. Autoimmune. I mean, I have to tell you, on my feeds, I see it every day. And I almost feel like the medical community is inventing new words every day. I can almost hardly keep up with these new autoimmune diseases. I always go to the
right, I'm with
SCD9
you.
website to see, like, is this an official diagnosis now? Like, what are we doing with this autoimmune? What does it even
Yeah,
mean? Like,
what does it mean? That's a good question. That is a really good question. We're really what research has been done on IBS is obviously one. Crohn's. There's a lot with MS being an autoimmune condition. So like literally starting in the gut and working its way up. Those are probably the three that I know of off the top of my head that there's active research being done and looked into.
what do you have to say? This is a great question by Maria Green. She's asking about keto as it relates to an acidic pH in the body.
Great question. Great question. So that's where the confusion between a lot of people say, oh, keto and ketoacidosis are the same thing. Ketoacidosis is very acidic, and ketoacidosis only happens in uncontrolled type 1 diabetics. That's the only way it happens. Uncontrolled type 1 diabetes, and it's rare. Keto, like a well-formulated ketogenic diet, your body still stays within that range. There's been a multitude of studies looking at like pH and alkalinity, and it doesn't change on a ketogenic diet because you're not at those extreme ranges that only really happen in uncontrolled type 1 diabetes.
Wow, that's huge. That's a big question. I didn't know the answer to that, so I really appreciate that. You know, I could sit here all night and talk about this, and we have such incredible questions. So we'll go back and answer them, but I want to make sure that everybody gets to the resources that they need. So if you guys are just tuning in, I posted how you can follow Dr. Lowery. Some of them are coming in late and they're like, is he an MD? And I'm like, no, he's a PhD. But you're on the front lines of research. If you guys have never seen the ASPI website, it's the ASPI.com, right? And then we have
Right.
Ketogenics.com, which Ryan is co-owner of, ASPI, which he's co-founder of. You know, you guys have been published in what, 500 or so medical journals, peer reviewed.
Yep.
So we don't need to question Ryan here at all. This is you're getting it from the front lines of the cutting edge research. So I hope that everybody enjoyed it. And I had personally asked him as well as Dr. Wilson to come in because, for one, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about ketogenic, and we have thousands and thousands of FasciaBlaster users on it. So I really appreciate you jumping into the groups. If you have questions, you can ask it in our Ketogenics for FasciaBlasters group, and they can also reach out to you on your social media. Are you pretty active in that?
Always. And I'll actually jump back on this live and help answer questions that we might have missed, for sure.
Awesome. I love it. I mean, you guys take advantage of this. It is not that often that you get to sit with someone like this. And I love all the guests that we have because I feel like if we flash forward 30 years, you know, you're the ones making history. The people who are doing the research are going to make the history. So I'm honored to be your friend. I'm honored that you guys did our research, and I hope that everybody who's watching this feed goes out and follows you and learns everything they can. Hopefully we can help ourselves, our children, our parents, and follow in your footsteps of your passion. So thank you for joining me, and I'm sure I'm going to see you real soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been amazing.
Good night, guys.
Good night.